It's I, Wacky Anime What If. I hope you enjoy this video, and if you do, please destroy that like button. And anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. But before we do, I have a second channel known as Midnight Psycho, where I play many different horror games, or many different Among Us games, and other games. Let's go ahead and get into this. Izuku was very cheerful. Ever since he was born, he always had a smile on his face. He was always cheerful, happy, and lucky-going. That's what Inko ends up thinking of Izuku. And at the age of 4, he was the happiest. As soon as he woke up, he ended up jumping up and down up on his bed and saying, "I'll be a hero just like All Might, and finally 4. Now I can go to the Quirk Doctor. This is going to be awesome." And he was very cheerful that day. He was very excited. And so was his other brother. His brother was quite excited too. He just didn't show as much of it because he felt like it would be embarrassing. His other brother was known as Jake Midoriya. They were both excited and they ran out the door of their room and knocked on Inko's door. They both knocked on Inko's door and they were excited, all excited and jittery. They were jumping up and down. And Inko merely opened the door and walked out and said, "Oh, I'm guessing you two want to go to the Quirk Doctor? But it's a little bit too early to go to the Quirk Doctor currently. You're going to have to wait a few hours," is what Inko says. And then Hisashi exits out behind her and says, "No, they don't. After all, I work as a Quirk Doctor. I can just examine their quirks, and I can do it for free, so let's go ahead and do it." And Inko looks at him and just says, "Well, we can't accept benefits from your job just because you are a Quirk Doctor. We can't accept doing it for free. After all, you could get fired if they found out." And he merely says, yeah, that's true. But I'm paying for it, though. I'll pay for the checkup. The only thing is, just make sure that no one really finds out we're doing it before they're open." And both kids jump up and down, and Ingo merely just smiles and says, You're quite the catch, aren't you?" And they both kiss, and Izuku and Jake just look away and say, "Ew, cooties!" And they both just start laughing, both Inko and Hisashi. They both pick up Jake and Izuku. Hisashi picking up Jake and Inko picking up Izuku. And they both walk towards the car, and both of the boys are excited. They put them in the back seat, and Inko and Hisashi get in the front. Inko is currently driving them to the Quirk Doctor, or Hisashi's workplace. As soon as they reach there, Hisashi was about to walk in, and Hisashi's caretaker, well, Hisashi's boss, is there saying, "Hold up, what are you doing?" And Hisashi says, "Oh, I was coming into work early, and I figured might as well check what my boys have, like what quirk they have. I'll also make sure to pay for the checkup." And the boss merely said, alright, I guess so. I mean, you've been doing good for years, so I'll let this slide, even though you're not supposed to." And the boss merely pats him on the back, but says, "Yeah, but you owe me a beer." And Hisashi merely says, "Alright, we'll go drinking after this." And the boss is like, "Yeah!" And he starts walking away, because the boss had to go to a meeting. And Hisashi walks into the Quirk Doctor's office, into the hospital, into the Quirk Doctor's office, his office specifically. And he ends up asking for Jake to come over towards him. He does a few x-ray scans, and Jake does have a quirk, it seems. But they don't know what it is. And it seems quite bizarre, honestly. As I check it more into it, they finally figure out what it is after a few hours. Apparently, his quirk is mind manipulation. Well, not mind manipulation. It's more of an illusion quirk, to be exact. He can manipulate a certain part of the mind to perceive something different. For example, if there are two people and they both saw a bird in front of them, he could walk to the middle of both of them and manipulate one of their minds to where instead of a bird, they see a dragon or something. It's quite the powerful quirk. And Hisashi smiles and says, that's quite the shocker. I mean, both me and Inko both just have me spitting out fire out of my mouth and, well, her being able to use telekinesis. I was expecting a combination of those two. But hey, this is even better. As he puts his hand on top of Jake's head and starts to ruffle his hair, and Jake merely says, "Hey, quit it, Dad." And they both start laughing. Everyone starts laughing, and Izuku is very happy for his brother. And Hisashi says, "Oh, Izuku, come on. We're going to do yours next." And as Jake walks to Inko, and Izuku walks to Hisashi, Inko hugs Jake and says, We're going to do great. You're going to do great. You can become a hero. You can become anything you want." And as soon as Izuku walks towards Hisashi, they do some x-rays, and Hisashi seems relatively panicked. And he's starting to tremble. He's starting to shake. And his eyes are starting to look different at Izuku. He looks at Izuku, and he merely says, Get out, get out, get out. And Izuku merely says, "Dad, wait, what did you say?" And then he yells, "Get out!" And Izuku says, "But Dad, what do you mean, get out?" And then he says, Get the fuck out of my office." And he looks at Izuku with as much pure disdain as he can. And Izuku gets scared and runs towards his mom and hugs her. And Inko merely says, "Hisashi, what was that for? You scared him. Why did you say that?" And Hisashi grabs Inko and says, "Kids, I'm sorry for what I said before, Izuku, but could you please leave the room? I have to tell Inko something." And Izuku and Jake go to the waiting room. Jake goes to the restroom and comes back later on. But in the meantime, Inko and Hisashi are both talking about why he acted like this. But then Hisashi merely says, "It's because of the quirk he has. I'm going to tell you what it is, but do not tell him it. Just tell him he's quirkless." And Hisashi says this with a complete seriousness. And Inko says, "But they'll bully him if he's quirkless. You know what they do to quirkless kids, right?" And he also says, "But if you don't, then he might get abducted by villains. We don't know what'll happen." And as Hisashi says this, Inko says, "Wait, what do you mean abducted by villains?" And Hisashi says, "His quirk. It's a villainous quirk. It's known as the Negative Quirk. Apparently he feeds on despair or negative emotions. And the more negative emotions there is, the stronger he is, the faster he is, the more intelligent he becomes, and the more his body evolves. He'll get stronger and stronger the more negative emotions are being fed to him. We cannot let him activate his quirk by knowing it. If he knows what his quirk is, or if he just feels negative emotions from anyone, then he could activate it unintentionally, and he could be abducted if they find out, if the League of Villains find out, or if any of them find out." And Inko says, "Wait, who's the League of Villains?" And Hisashi says, "Well, there's something I've got to tell you. I'm not just a quirk doctor. I'm also, you already know, a cop." And as he tells her this, she asks, "Wait, you were a cop also? Why didn't you tell me?" And Inko ends up asking this more. As Hisashi says, "I couldn't tell you because I'm using this as a cover-up. To be exact, I'm posing as a quirk doctor. I'm not actually one. I'm actually a police officer. And I'm going undercover because we're going after a person who experiments on kids or grabs their quirks and gives them to someone very dangerous. So, Inko, I'm going to need you to tell him he's quirkless. And we're going to have to love him as much as possible. Because we don't want him to feel alienated or to feel that the world's rejecting him, that society is, and become a villain just like them. We don't want this. And as he says this, she nods in agreement. They both leave the room, and they walk into the waiting room, and they see Izuku crying, and talking to Jake, saying, Does he not love me anymore? He told me to get out. He told me to. He looked at me like I was something different. He looked at me like I wasn't his son. And he was crying into Jake's shoulder. And Asashi just realized what he just did. He did it in the spur of the moment because he was so angry that one of his sons had this villainous quirk that would be sought after by everyone, and they treat him as an outcast for it. But he didn't realize he ended up putting this frustration onto Midoriya. And he walks up towards Midoriya, and he's about to put his shoulder onto Izuku, his hand onto Izuku's shoulder. But Izuku just looks at him, and it just starts to tremble. And Asashi just says, why are you trembling? Why are you scared? He says this in a low voice. His eyes feel like they're about to water. He feels like he did something horribly wrong to his own son. Why did I look at him with disdain for that moment? Must have traumatized him already. Huh. And I'm trying to protect him from many things when I'm actually just hurting him right now. He kneels down towards Izuku. He puts out his hands and wraps it around Izuku and hugs him. Izuku is still shaking because Izuku remembers the moment where he saw his dad's eyes look at him like he was just some stranger, like he wasn't a part of the family, or just to the fact that it scared him. And as soon as he got hugged, he still was scared. He was scared he was going to get thrown away or something. After all, he's heard many different rumors of people who either didn't have quirks or their quirks were bad and they were thrown away by their parents. And he does not want that to happen to him. He doesn't want it to happen to anyone. And Izuku just merely puts his head into Asashi's chest and starts to cry, saying, "You don't want me anymore?" And as soon as he says this, Asashi's heart just breaks a little. He hugs him as tight as possible and says, No, I was just mad at something. You don't have to worry about it. I love you no matter what. And he pats Izuku's back of his head. And while this is happening, Inko's watching this, and Inko starts to tear up because, well, they know what's going to happen now. They have to tell him he's quirkless. They have to tell him that to protect him. It's for his own good, is what they're both saying in their heads. And Hisashi looks into Izuku's eyes and says, "There's something I've got to tell you. Izuku, you're quirkless." And as soon as Izuku heard this, the little All Might figurine that he was holding in his hand this entire time, he dropped it, and it broke. And Izuku, his eyes were watering out. And they were watering out even more like a waterfall. And there was snot going down his nose. And he looked at his dad and says this, "Can I still become a hero?" And he had the most hopeful eyes, just a little glint of hope. And Hisashi looked at him and started crying himself and said, I'm sorry, but you can't become a hero. It's not possible without a quirk." And Izuku just starts to tear up even more, and he buries his chest into his shoulder, and he cried the entire day. And Jake tried to comfort him, but nothing would be available. He wouldn't let anyone get near him for weeks. He'd always be bullied at school by Kachan, saying that he was a quirkless nobody. He was nothing, and he could never become anything. Every day at school, he'd be bullied, he'd be scarred, he'd be beaten, he'd be dragged through the dirt. His teachers would even beat the crap out of him and pretend like they didn't, and just say he tripped. Even when Hisashi and Inko tried to press the school merely saw them as the parents of one quirkless kid. And this pissed Hisashi off. Hisashi and Inko. But they couldn't do a thing about it. They couldn't move him out of school either, because they didn't have enough money. And Izuku, for the entire time, through elementary school, middle school, was in complete despair. He consistently thought of many ways that he could become a hero, support course, or any other thing, support course, rescue course, anything he could do, he would want to. But every time that he tried to have his hopes out and forward, everyone always stomped on it. To where Izuku, he developed a crippling depression on the inside. He started to see the world as just something that just stomps on your hopes and dreams as he was growing up. But he always started to feel a little bit of surge of power. But he doesn't know why. Maybe it's because of the adrenaline. Or maybe it's just because he's just imagining he has a quirk or something. Throughout the years, once he enters middle school, at the last day of middle school, Izuku, who is always in the back and always being taunted by the teachers, put in an application for UA. Izuku wants to join UA and prove that even if he's quirkless, he can still be worth something. He can still have his dreams. He can still do something, do anything he wants. And that was his aspiration and the thing he put down on his paper. And he put down as much as he could with as much conviction as possible to convince the people of UA to let him at least attempt. Because UA, majority of the people at UA that are processing them don't let them go in if they're quirkless. Because they're scared they're going to get injured. Or because they don't believe in them. And Izuku tried to convince them once he filled out his form. But nothing happened. Because once the teacher walked in and started throwing the papers up in the air and said, I was going to hand out your aptitude test, but I know you all want to become heroes. And he looked at Izuku and said, oh yeah, there are people that tried to apply to UA. And there's also people that have applied. Bakugo Katsuki, you've applied to UA, and you've been accepted. You can now do the UA entrance exam. And Bakugo says, you're damn right I was accepted. And he kicks his foot onto the desk and says, of course I'd be the only one accepted, considering I'm the best here. And unlike all of you that have useless quirks, I have the best one here. And as he looked towards Midoriya, and he said, unlike everyone else here, I have the most special quirk, but at least you all aren't as worthless as that little boy over there, pretending to be a hero, pretending to be anything. He's not ever going to be a man. He will never be one. He will never be a hero. He'll never be anything. As he points towards Midoriya, and everyone starts to laugh. And Bakugo merely laughs at Midoriya and walks up towards him and says, you didn't apply to UA, did you? And he slams his hands towards his desk, and explosions come out. The desk explodes, and he grabs Deku by the face with his palm and looks at the teacher and says, hey, teach, by chance did Midoriya apply to UA? And the teacher ended up saying, oh yes, he actually did, but he was rejected. And Bakugo just got a laugh out of this. He laughed at Izuku. He said, oh, you got rejected. Is it because you're quirkless? Or is it because you're a loser? Or just overall useless? Hell, there isn't a single thing you could do. You tried to even apply for the support course, the hero course, or any of those. You not having a quirk would just hold you back. But hey, don't worry. I know of a perfect way to get yourself a quirk. Why don't you jump off the roof and go kill yourself? And once Izuku heard this, he just snapped. He punched Bakugo in the face as hard as possible, and Bakugo reflexively did not mean to, but he sent his explosion directly into Izuku's face that he was holding on to. Izuku cried out and screamed, and he held onto his face, and he was on the ground, and there was blood dripping out of his left side of his face, and he started to feel like he was going unconscious. And Jake, who was in the classroom, ran up to Bakugo and started hammering down on him and saying, "What did you do, you bastard?" And that's all that Izuku could hear before his eyesight disappeared and he was drifting off to sleep. And he heard voices around him a few hours later, or what he could assume was a few hours. The voices said, "I'm sorry, but Izuku, he's not gonna make it. I don't think he is. Or even if he does, I don't really think he's gonna be useful. To be honest, Inko and Hasashi, I don't think that you guys really want this kid. And I can tell you guys don't. After all, this kid has no quirk. He's useless. And what my boy did was do you a favor. After all, if he dies, who's going to care?" And Izuku heard all of this, but he was still asleep. And he was in anger now. He opened his eyes, but he could only open one of them. He looked towards the person who was speaking, and he saw that it was Bakugo's dad. He got up out of the bed that he was in. He realized he was in the nurse's office. As soon as he got out of the bed, everyone heard him get out of bed. And he looked at Bakugo's dad and says, "Shut the fuck up." And Bakugo's dad says, "You dare say that to me, you quirkless little brat." And he punches Izuku directly into the face on the side that was burnt. And once he does, Izuku ends up gasping in pain, and his eyeball pops into his skull. Directly past into his skull. Deeper in. And the nurse says, "Hey, what did you just do?" And as soon as Izuku fell to the ground and grasped his eye, he felt intense pain, but he also felt something he never thought he would feel about someone. He thought it was an emotion that died long ago. He felt enraged, angry, and he felt like his body was getting more powerful. The more he looked at Bakugo's dad, the angrier he felt. And the nurse went behind Izuku, patted him on the back, and tried to examine his eye. Once she examined his eye, she said, "Oh no, what have you done?" And Bakugo's dad says, "What? I just disciplined this brat. That's what I did." And the nurse says, "He's not going to be able to see out of his eye again. You just completely destroyed it." And Bakugo's dad said, "What use does a quirkless have for his eyes anyway? After all, you did hear about the new law that passed last year, right?" As soon as he mentioned that new law, Izuku felt even more rage because he heard about it and he knew about it. It's just he didn't think that it would be this bad. Or he hoped it wouldn't be. He knew it would. He actually thought it would be worse. The whole entire world of Japan, the whole entire continent of Japan, has decided that the actual laws for human rights will not apply to the quirkless. And that's what was applied a year ago. And this is why Izuku's been suffering even more. Because people would burn him. They would completely beat him to almost death. Even when he's on death's door, they'd continuously beat him. Izuku doesn't even know how he survived. He looks at Bakugo's dad with so much rage and he says, "Oh, you think that you can just do whatever you want because I'm fucking quirkless? Well, let me see. Can I do whatever I want to you if I'm quirkless?" He rushes at Bakugo's dad. Bakugo's dad just merely looks at him and spits fire directly out of his mouth. And Izuku just dodges to the left. He kicks Bakugo's dad into the nuts, and he starts punching him in the face as much as possible. And he gets on top of Bakugo's dad once he falls down and starts punching him in the face more and more. The impacts don't even sound like a human punch. It sounds like a sledgehammer hitting against the skull. You could hear a thump. You could hear a crack. You could hear something breaking every time he punched into Bakugo's dad's face. And Izuku immediately said, "Come on, you little fucker. Come on." And he looked at him and his eyes started changing. They changed completely pitch black with completely dark red pupils. And he said, "Come on, you fucker, come on." And he kept on doing it for hours and hours. Everyone tried to pull him off, but they couldn't. And the nurse said, "Are you sure this kid was quirkless?" And Hisashi ends up saying, "Yes, I'm sure. He won't get off. Izuku, get off, he's gonna die. You're hitting him too hard." And Izuku says, "Oh, but when he hit me so hard, you didn't do a damn thing. Don't think I haven't known how you treat me. You used to care for me, but you stopped doing that for years after you found out I was quirkless, huh?" He looks at them with hatred in his eye, and he merely just says, "Well, go fuck yourselves." He gets up and he walks out. And Inko and Hisashi both try to follow him. They end up saying, "It's not like that. We do care for you." And then Izuku just looks at them and says, "You care for me? You care for me?" And he starts crying out of one eye and says, "If you cared for me, you would have actually hung out with me. All these years you've ignored me. You've neglected me. Am I really a part of the family? Or am I just some creature that you guys take care of and don't spend any time with?" And Izuku just looks directly into their eyes and says, "From now on, I'm not a Midoriya. Even though it's required by law that I stay with you, don't ever call me Izuku Midoriya. Just call me Izuku." He ends up walking towards them and says, "Now let's go home, now that that's cleared up." They take him home, and once he enters the house, Hisashi ends up trying to walk towards him and says, "I've got to tell you something." And then Izuku just looks at him and says, "Don't tell me a damn thing. I don't want to hear it." And he walks up to his room. He lays down on his bed, and he closes the door. As soon as he closes the door, he starts reflecting on his entire life, everything that happened. He starts to feel it all hit him at once. And then he starts to think about something darker and darker. He thinks, since I'm quirkless, everyone just feels like they can do whatever they want with me. I can't become a hero, can't become anything. Why is this world like this? And then he pulls out, next to his bed, he pulls out of his dresser a box cutter. And that's the end of What If Deku Had the Negative Quirk. I hope you all enjoyed, and this might have a redo. But anyway, let's go ahead and end it.